Hi, Fergus.
Hey, Landry, it's a beautiful place you have here. Just scan around. Let's have a look at this lovely place. And look at that clock. That was in my high school, 1967. I know it. Look at that beautiful spot.
So welcome to the Toronto Centre for the Arts. You are in the upper gallery, which is going to be the space that we're going to be doing the Bare Bones and Upfront series piece. And this is our 9th interview of the artists that are participating in
the and some good artists,
show.
I noticed.
Some very good artists,
yeah,
yes.
Nice,
yeah.
Nice programming.
Thank you
With
very
Kim's
much.
help, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Awesome.
One of the first questions I'd like to ask is, why Toronto? Why have you picked this city to do your craft?
You know, I was born in Toronto. You walk around the streets here, you don't always meet people that were born in Toronto, but I was born here in a blizzard, actually, oddly enough. And have grown up here, although my family moved around a bit, so I traveled a little bit. And, you know, when I was really small, I don't say I really traveled myself, but, and we lived a few other places. But since I started high school, I've pretty well lived in Toronto all the time. You know, there have been thoughts of moving away. I've spent some time other places, but I'm very used to the city. I grew up at Yonge and Bloor, so I'm kind of familiar with all that stuff, you know. Best ways to bicycle around downtown, for instance, even though they keep changing the one-way streets. But, yeah.
Does Toronto have a certain pull for you creatively in what you create?
Well, all this stuff kind of, if I can use that word, informs what people do, you know. I was lucky in that when I went to high school in Toronto, things were reasonably well funded, and there was an amazing music program, just generally speaking, throughout the city. There were instruments, there were good teachers, there were facilities. So I benefited from that, playing music. I had a great music teacher, Ron Chandler, and he inspired us all and all that kind of stuff. But there was a great atmosphere generally in the city for making music. That was the time when Seiji Aizawa came to conduct the Toronto Symphony, and everybody was excited about the Toronto Symphony. You know, like it was that kind of atmosphere going on. And on the other side, I lived at Yonge and Bloor, so I was exposed to the whole Yonge Street, Yorkville scene, and there was, of course, tremendous activity there. People were very excited. We were so spoiled, in a sense, because at that time, the time of the Fab Four and all that nonsense, there were lots of wonderful Toronto musicians playing. People like Duke Ellington and Count Basie were coming every year to play here, so we had the pick of those kinds of people, great rock players. So that was a very nurturing scene. And then a little later on in the 70s, we had a whole wave of immigration from places, a lot of people from Jamaica, but lots of other places around the world. And their kids landed in those Toronto schools that had some nice instruments and music programs, and suddenly there are all these other kinds of musicians with all those other kind of influences. And I don't have to tell you or anyone else the results of that, because we've seen, I don't know, all kinds of people you could name, you know, coming out of the scene. Wonderful instrumentalists, rappers, musicians, whatever, all of the different types. So it's a wonderful spot for melding those kinds of things together. And one thing about Toronto that people always forget, but I think is kind of important, is that it's a city, unlike many of the other big music centers, where you can literally park your car or your bicycle and walk to 5 or 6, 7 or 8 clubs that all have live music. There's not very many places in the world, especially big music centers like New York or LA. You can't find that. You got to drive from one spot to the other, and people do it because that's the way it is. But in Toronto, we've always had these concentrations, you know. In the 40s, when the jazz scene was going, it was on Girard, and then it spread up Avenue Road, and then it was in Yorkville, and then went down to Queen Street. And we've always had these congregations. You know, when the Queen Street thing was happening, you could go down there with 8 or 9 clubs with great live music, and it was all happening. You could walk from one to the other. People always forget that about Toronto, but people don't know how lucky they are here. So.
Very cool. There's a connection with your music and Jamaica in the context of what your quote-unquote genre is. Can you talk about that?
Well, you know, I've always loved all kinds of music, and I love singing, and I love instrumental music. I was a clarinet player, as I mentioned. The Jarvis thing inspired me, as far as that goes. And I always loved rock music, because of the Fab Four. But when I say rock, I'm talking, we loved Elvis and Jerry Lee Lewis and blah, 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 But then you get to the end of the 60s, into the 70s, and the rock music is more one singer as opposed to harmony singing. One singer singing and a lead guitar player, and suddenly the drummers are soloing, and it's like the worst elements of jazz, the wanking part of jazz combined with the leaden rhythm sections of rock. It was tedious. Anyway, so Bob Marley and the Wailers album came out in, I think, maybe 72 in North America. Wouldn't really have any exposure really before. I loved Jamaica ska by the early, that tune, ska, 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 dun, 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 wicked tune. But anyway, but the Marley thing was really refreshing. The bass playing was prominent and fantastic, and I always loved McCartney's bass playing because he kind of brought the bass out in the rock thing, made it an instrument like that. So it was like that. And they had harmony singing. I always loved harmony singing, so it was kind of vanishing out of rock. It's pathetic what's happened to the singing in rock. It's sad. But anyway, never mind that. And it just appealed to me because once I got, because I lived in the Kensington Market area, and there's, Stranger Cole had his store, and there were all these guys, and I played the saxophone, so I kind of fell in with these guys, and they said, you can come and play with us, and this. I was in the early 70s. So that's how that started, just playing with those guys, because I met them, and I used to hang out at Strangers, and this guy, Tiger, had this place called Tiger's Coconut Grove, and he made all these drinks that we loved, like pina colada, that I didn't know anything about, I just thought, well, this is fantastic. And so once you dip into the music a little further, you realize, and I'm a horn player, so you realize there's all these instrumentals, like there used to be in rock, right? But we don't get that anymore. We get the EDM instrumental. But, there are all these beautiful instrumentals, and then all these great singing groups that I'd never ever heard of, and then I realized that there's this whole parallel universe going on in Jamaica in the 60s that's as full of life as the English thing was, and the thing that happened in Toronto, and with all these groups that I never heard of, but they were really popular. Like, things were so regional then, right? You could have a scene going in a place like Boston and have groups that all knew each other. Anyway, fantastic. And I find, the Jamaican charts have got the beginnings of reggae on it, some reggae. And they've got love songs on them, and they've got songs about people riding bicycles, and they've got songs about people going to market, and they've got songs about people cheating on their girlfriends, and they've got country and western songs. The first time I went to Jamaica, Islands on the Stream by Dolly Parton and Kenny Rogers had been #1 for months, and was still #1. And I was going, first time I went, and I'm thinking, well, I'm going to hear all this reggae, and I go down, and there's Islands in the Stream, it's playing everywhere, right? Everywhere. And you go into the stores, and there's Marty Robbins' Gunfighter Ballads, and Jim Reeves, all the prominent, they're the ones prominently displayed in the window, right? So anyway, but that's how I got involved in the reggae thing. And I just really responded to the singing especially, right? Like that kind of group singing that, all the rock bands used to do that kind of group singing, with their own spin. They kind of stopped doing it, but it was in there, and I loved that. It stayed in rhythm and blues, and they took it out of the hip hop, but then they found they had to put it back in the hip hop. Mm-hmm. They couldn't do without it, right? And, the dancehall thing was big in Jamaica, and after a while in Jamaica, they found they had to put the singing back in the dancehall because people were just kind of going, okay, what happened to their nice singers that we have so many of? And you go to Jamaica, and there are singers.
That's right.
There are singers.
You're going to sing something for us right now, aren't you?
I'll give it a shot.
Okay.
I don't know about the reggae thing, the drummy. Okay, all right. But anyway, I'll just play it. I've got a lot of new songs, so I'm going to be playing some new songs in the evening. And my friend Tim is going to be on the evening as well, Tim Bovaconti, and he and I were together last night playing a gig, which is really nice. And we played this song anyway. This is called Never Given Up on Love, and I've never played it just like this, but we'll see if we can catch the... strain. How it weaves a little path. It's always turning back to yesterday. But I'm never giving up on love. No, I'm never giving up on love. Well, I thought that you should know I still love you so. I'm never giving up on Here we are, wanting to play the game. A little older now, wanting to risk it all again. Now you've opened up the door. I know there's so much more we both could say. And if you would realize what's right before your eyes, then everything could change. But I'm never giving up on love. No, I'm never giving up on love. Well, I thought that you should know I still love you so. I'm never giving up on, never giving up on, never giving up on. Yeah, yeah. Well,
Fergus, thank you so very much.